I'm now very pleased to welcome on to the stand our next speaker. He's come up from London specifically to speak to us this afternoon. He is the Chief Design Officer at the Design Council, and he heads up the organization's Design Challenges program that demonstrates how design can drive innovation through tackling big issues of our time. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matt Hunter.
Thanks a lot, Tony. It's a great delight to be here. I must say I haven't got out of the office enough in the past 3 months, so it's great. It's been a year since I've been in this building, and it looks as great as ever. So I wanted to talk in the next 15 minutes about some things that inspire me. We've had a great range of things that I've heard us talk about today. Some very detailed things and some much broader things about the scale of the NHS. But if there's anything that designers get excited about, it's inspiration. So innovation is hard enough. Where do new ideas come from? Why should we innovate in the first place? So I thought, you know what, let's do a bit of horizon scanning. Let's work out 5 things that may be interesting in the next 5 years. I've spent the last 20 years as a designer in Silicon Valley to begin with, and then back here in London. So hopefully I can predict a little bit what I think might happen in the next 5 years. But I say designer's perspective because I think for me, design is an integral part of innovation. I often like to think of it like a 3-legged stool, and I think it's written down even in the brochure. You know, there's business, there's technology, and for me there's design. Innovation can come from any one of those things. We're forever imagining how we reinvent business process. We're always thinking, we know fundamentally that technology is one of the biggest drivers of innovation, but what does design really have to do with it? Well, very simply, and it's already been said, you know, innovation's value is in the eyes of the user, and we're talking a lot about generating value. But if innovation's value is in the eyes of the user, and this is Alice. Alice was 92. This picture was taken in 1998. And this was the birth of a telecare company, Health Hero Networks, that recently got sold to Robert Bosch Systems for many hundreds of millions of pounds. But this was a key moment, right? They had some technology about telehealth. They had the ideas about a business model. The question is, could Alice press the buttons and understand what was going on? And with a laptop, you'll see on the right-hand side a laptop and a bit of cardboard, she actually worked out how to use it. So in a day with some designers, they actually worked out that there was value in Alice's eyes. So user experience matters. You know, I spent 1995 and 1996 with the picture on the left building digital cameras for Kodak. Sadly, 15 years later, they went bust. They couldn't work out how to add enough value, and they got beaten by Nikon and Instagram and Apple and Flickr and people like that. On the other hand, 1998, I was working with TiVo on the future of sort of digital TV, and we see it now, many years later, turning up on the Virgin network. We managed to do kind of thumbs up, thumbs down. How do you respond to TV? How do you think about programming a device? How is there more value than it just being a digital VCR that no one could work out how to program anyway? So design is about user experience, and that user experience adds value. So design matters. And these days, here's a picture of the Designers Fund, which is sort of listing, here are all the great startups that are either started by designers or alone, or one of the core founders is a designer. And someone tweeted the other day, look, I get it, okay? Design. We get it. Can we just get on? So to some extent, I think many people, both big, you know, the Samsungs and Virgins and Apples of the world, but also the small, fundamentally understand that if we're to do good innovation, we need design. So I'm not going to really talk about that anymore. When I started at the Design Council 2 years ago, someone said, you do realize there's a potato council, don't you? And the role of the potato council is to get people to eat more potatoes. And so I hope very much that we can be a little bit more sophisticated than that and not just say, design, you know you need it. So rather than talk about it from a design point of view, I thought, okay, here are 5 themes that for me are inspired by a sense of user experience. What is it that consumers are doing? How are they thinking? And how does what they think and what they do affect what we should be doing as innovators? So, theme number 1. Now, this is really a bit obvious, isn't it? You know, you turn problems into opportunities, and yet it is remarkably hard to see past the problem, to see the opportunity. And indeed, there are also different scales of problem as well. So we could start off really simply, right? More suction. We all know Dyson decided he hated the vacuum cleaner, and he spent a long time, and 2,000 prototypes later, and he made a fantastic business where he's now solving problems from that fan is too noisy. He tried with the washing machine but kind of failed. So he's going around trying to reinvent objects. But we at the Design Council have tried to open that up a little bit more. This is a pint glass, and this pint glass is currently manufactured by Arc International, and they call it the ultimate pint glass. But it was actually started because we ran a competition with the Home Office around facial injuries, alcohol-fueled violence. It costs untold damage emotionally and physically, and financially, it's worth many tens of millions of pounds, if not billions of pounds, to the NHS and to society. So we said, okay, let's imagine, rather than legislating and saying everyone must drink out of plastic glasses, let's find some hybrid, some sort of plastic glass hybrid. Who can develop it? So we ran a competition. And ultimately, a company called Design Bridge won it, and Arc International has taken it on. You can now go buy this on Amazon if you want to, search for the ultimate pint glass. And this is being sold as a longer-lasting pint glass. It's great for the publican. It's got a better head on it because it's got sort of, laser etching to cause the bubbles. But also there it says, but you're also doing something good for society. So this is something interesting where Arc International has created good business for itself, but at the same time by doing something good for society. We've also taken a look at infection control. So Professor Adil was talking earlier on about how to get engaged. We've run 4 challenges now with the Department of Health, where we've taken a problem they have, like infection control in this case, and thrown it open to everyone and said, can you do better? So what we said in this case was, you would not believe how difficult it is to clean hospital furniture, all those nooks and crannies. Just imagine in your mind for a moment a chipboard bedside cabinet. Think about all the corners. Think about the drawer runners. No member of nursing staff is going to be able to clean that. If you take a commode, it's even worse. You have to sort of clean it with a toothbrush. So we ran a national competition, and again, 11 different products were designed by 11 different formations of sort of a manufacturer and a designer. And what's interesting about this product here for Bristol Made is not only has it been very successful for them, they've sold about 2,000 units so far in just about a year, and they've just retooled. So they're beginning to make the millions of pounds in revenue that they want. But also they've reimagined loads of other products within their business. They have recognized that there is a market for easy-to-clean furniture, and therefore it has inspired them to create a whole kind of design bugs out range as far as they're concerned. But more recently, we've been looking even further than that, and Wayne Hemingway this morning mentioned the work with dementia. Last week with the minister and others, we launched some work for dementia. You can see the URL down there if you want to go take a look, Living Well with Dementia. 5 products and services, from assistive dogs to satellite wristbands to bits of software to this, the Ode. And the point was that actually malnutrition is a severe problem within dementia care. People forget to eat, or they sort of forget that they have an interest in eating. So this fascinating formation of an industrial design company from Hampshire and a woman, Lizzie Ostrom, who's fascinated by fragrance, came together to say, what if we could put the smell of Bakewell tarts or orange juice or fish and chips or freshly baked bread into a machine that 3 times a day would come on around lunchtime? How would it stimulate people's salivation and their interest in food? Now, it's going to go to pilot very soon, but the beginnings, the early experiments they did were amazing in terms of how they began to help people, such as the woman on the right, put on weight. So here we have more and more example here of not just reimagining what we know exists, a new vacuum cleaner, but now using a creative leap to really imagine what doesn't exist. And that is where, who knew we needed Facebook? Who knew we needed Instagram? Things like that. Creativity at its best is not just about reinventing what exists, but it's actually going from problem to opportunity to imagine what even doesn't exist right now. Next month, we're going to launch things around an aging population in general. This is one of 7 social enterprises and small micro-enterprises that we've been incubating for a year. And it's a talent agency for the nearly retired and the retired in Hackney. And essentially it says, look, we can think about this in terms of care. We can think about this in terms of waiting until those people have a crisis when they may be 70, 80, 90, or we could help them to feel really good about themselves, especially as they head towards a difficult moment such as retirement, and reimagine them and reinforce the idea that they are assets. They are wonderful people. They have been wonderful people all of their lives. There's just something very, very weird and unnecessary about retirement where sometimes you don't feel like that. So again, we're taking a creative approach, problem, getting old is sometimes not fun, it is sometimes difficult, but turning it into an opportunity, saying that actually it's about creating a sense of resilience within the population rather than merely coping with crisis. So problems really can be turned into opportunities, and big problems can be turned into big opportunities, not just small ones. So my question for you is, are you thinking big enough? Are you thinking creatively enough about how you reperceive problems as opportunities? That's one of the first values that a sort of creative but experience level approach can take. Number 2, best in show versus best of breed. So, we're all familiar with dog shows, right? And let's say I breed schnauzers. I'm really excited about having the best schnauzer. Of course, one of the dogs, has got to win best in show. But so often, I'm just interested in schnauzers. That's my passion, so I'm going to have the best schnauzer. Consumers don't really think like the dog breeders. I suppose they think like the judges who have to make the wider choice. Just because you're a bank doesn't mean I don't compare you to something else. So we've seen shopping change quite a lot online. Here's Amazon shop window. It allows me to shop in a fundamentally different way. Of course, this has forced consumers have therefore forced banks to say, well, what are you doing for us? Online banking used to be appalling. So consumers don't make a difference between banking and shopping. Bankers do, but consumers don't. What about voluntary groups? As part of the Design Out Crime program where you saw the pint glass, we helped Neighborhood Watch to rebrand and to re-emerge as a service that would both attract a younger audience but also enable them in order to form Neighborhood Watch units, to find out whether one existed in their area and join, or actually to be the activist, put up some posters and start themselves. So again, it doesn't matter whether you are a private sector company or a third sector volunteer company. Everyone knows, I was actually reading on the way up, a conference today at Nesta, essentially showing that, good branding and good design are a fundamental part of voluntary organizations and charities these days. You cannot compete just by thinking because you do good, you can beat the attention, really, essentially, of commerce and the private sector. And the government even is getting on it. For me, one of the most exciting groups of civil servants in the country are known as the Government Digital Service. They've snagged the top designer from Wieden & Kennedy, a top advertising agency. It's headed by Mike Bracken, who used to be head of Guardian Media. They have got some of the best designers and technologists in the country, and therefore the world, currently working on how the government makes its services digital by default. So again, the government cannot get away with being useless. The government can not get away with being less good than Amazon. The government has to be as good as, if not better, than Amazon. And of course, as we're hearing, both I think in terms of the health service itself, the National Health Service, but also in terms of what consumers do, what's happening now is that health services are feeling that disruption. No IT system really in the health service where you waste billions and billions of pounds can get away with being useless. So consumers are amazing at cutting across organizational silos, but cutting across category silos as well. So, which are you? Are you best in breed or are you best in show? To what extent are you looking out there in the world at all the other wonderful companies there in the world, and saying, I could be as good as you, and not just looking at those in your category? It's incredibly important to steal ideas from people who aren't even in your category. Number 3, access, not ownership. This is a story about service design, really. We've seen a massive disruption in the world of media, where CDs, these physical things that were the sort of derivative of vinyl, even more a physical thing, and tapes, began not to be sold anymore. And at first, of course, it was MP3s. There was this idea of being dematerialized, but it was still a kind of like a file. You still download it, you still stole it over the internet through peer-to-peer downloading services. But that's not where it is these days. This is Spotify. You know, it's like a personalized radio station. I kind of rent it. I have no need anymore to own the MP3 file, the CD, or the vinyl. So really, for young people, it's become about access to music. It's the way I create the list that I share with you. That's the social currency of music. It's not owning the CD. We see this, of course, in cloud computing now. Amazon Web Services. Amazon is one of the biggest providers of web services and cloud computing. So these days, I could have a little startup, and I could grow incredibly quickly, and I never have to buy a computer. It's all kind of virtual renting stuff. And that's the amazing thing. These guys can give me supercomputing power almost overnight and then take it away again. Access to cars. It's not even this dematerialized stuff like music and computing that gets shared. We know perfectly well from Streetcar and Zipcar, and even now something called Whipcar, which is where I rent my neighbor's car, that the internet has done amazing things in building trust and building awareness for the ability for me to share assets. So a huge number of people in metropolitan areas now no longer have a car. They don't need to, because it's down the road. Now, car rentals existed forever, but it was big and cumbersome, and I didn't, you know, it would take me an hour to get there. I can't pop to the shops in a rental car, can I? Now this is so quick, and I swipe a card and I stick in a PIN number. You know, this is so easy that I can actually pop to the shops in a rental car. That's pretty amazing. Airbnb, we know that. You know, this is the virtual bed and breakfast now. You know, we can access spare rooms. We can now disrupt hotels because again, the internet is giving a sense of awareness, but brokering a sense of trust that didn't happen before. I mean, these are huge disruptions happening to many different industries. So, you know, a lot of the themes I'm going through here aren't new ones this year. These are ones that have been building for several years now. Access to money. Of course, money has always been about borrowing it, right? But now the question is, who are you borrowing it for? So ZOPA, Zone of Personal Agreement, this has been around for many, many years now. And actually, it happens to be very, very hard to innovate in the financial services industry because to be a bank involves a lot of regulation. But nevertheless, they've been doing amazing things in terms of changing the way in which people borrow money. And finally, I know Rolls-Royce is sort of in this region, access to trust. You know, Rolls-Royce these days makes more money in selling a service surrounding its amazing engines than it does from the engines themselves. So the idea is I'm kind of buying thrust per hour. The total care package ultimately says, you just want an engine that works on your plane, right? You don't actually want to buy an engine. You want to lease them from us. And you know what? All the data from the engines goes right back to our technical center. And the amazing thing about this is that it means we know we need even more reliable engines. Because if the engine is faulty, that's now our problem, not yours. So it's amazing what is happening. Even, you know, a Trent engine or something like that, RB211, you know, an incredible bit of kit is now about access more than it is about ownership. So the question here is, you know, are you really serving your customers? Or are you sort of selling them stuff because that's what you're in the business of, but actually, all in all, you know, your customer may really not want to own what you're selling them if you're in a product business. You know, actually, maybe you want to serve them. So what's interesting is if you take the Zipcar example, many of the big automotive players are now getting into that space. They recognize that actually they need to understand this service model. It's not just about bashing metal. Number 4, the contribution economy. This phrase came from Forbes magazine a handful of years ago. And the basic idea was that we've gone from an industrial economy to a kind of product economy, and then a service economy, and then an experience economy, and now finally a contribution economy. The basic point was that actually consumers are no longer just consumers, they're taking part. So we've seen this in the internet a huge amount. You know, I can help you recommend something. TripAdvisor. You know, this isn't a bunch of sort of Michelin guide people going around at great expense. This is crowdsourced selection. But one more. Kickstarter, right? This is where people are not just voting, is that any good? They're sticking their cold, hard cash down. And the one on the left there has raised $1.4 million for an iPod dock. It's amazing the amount of money that people are managing to raise from these peer lending systems at the moment, or sort of peer funding systems. And this is working in terms of products, it's working in terms of arts events. It's amazing the plethora of ways in which people are now rallying around in a peer-to-peer way to be the angel funders, essentially. This is Made.com, Brent Hoberman's latest. And this is about sort of disintermediating furniture retailers. You know, if I'm a furniture manufacturer, I'll put a table up here. And then if you want it, just say you're going to buy it. And if enough of you want to buy it, I'll make it. So it's amazing now what's happening in terms of peer-to-peer retailing. So going beyond that kind of assisting with things, now to making things. So this is a Geiger map. This is made by my ex-colleague, Heian Xiang, for Japan, when the Fukushima disaster happened. She took radioactive sensors in Japan. She works in Clerkenwell, right, in London. She took radioactive sensors in Japan, patched them together via an internet service called Patch Bay, and put them on a map. And so she aggregated a huge amount of data and helped the citizens of Japan and globally interested people understand where the radiation was in Japan. Pretty amazing. She's a designer. This isn't her day job. She just did this in the evenings. Or, of course, making physical things now. Here's the MakerBot Industries Thing-O-Matic. You know, this is 3D printing, and it's, you can make this yourself, you know, the machine. It's amazing quite what's happening in terms of lowering the barrier to entry. So people can now adjust things, make things. The picture on the right-hand side is from Asa Aswach, a great industrial designer who's making some wonderful fittings, but often he's making a lampshade and then saying you, the customer, can customize it the way you want it uniquely. So we're beginning to see a fundamental shift in the way in which consumers and providers exist. It's much more complicated than it used to be. And the question really within the contribution economy is, are you open enough? Are you working with your supply chains in order to get them to create solutions for you? Are you working with your customers? It doesn't work for every type of business, but fundamentally that is the question that many people have to ask. Are you open enough? And finally, number 5, data is the new oil. This was actually coined by a service designer friend of mine, Chris Downs, that's turned up in the news much more recently, essentially saying that data is incredibly valuable. It was actually first coined for me way back in the late 90s by Harvard Business School professor Shoshana Zuboff that kind of said, these computer things are amazing because they automate things and they create information at the same time. The information is like a byproduct of all this automation stuff that happens. So, you know, when we're checking out in the till in Tesco's, they're gathering lots of information. And their agency, dunnhumby, does amazing things with it that helps Tesco target what you want to buy. This has been happening for many, many years. But now consumers are doing it themselves. So on the right, we've got the Jawbone Up, which has got sort of gyroscopes and sensors in it, which helps understand, am I sleeping well? Am I running? What am I doing? This is beginning to monitor what I do. And the basis watch on the left. So this is what some people are calling the quantified self. Loads of rather enthusiastic West Coast Californian people measuring themselves and trying to sort of outperform other people. This is the early days of it, but it's very interesting in terms of what's happening in terms of people taking responsibility for their own health and tracking it. Of course, machines create it. Smart meters are mandated to turn up in everyone's homes in a few years' time. It used to be 2013, I think now it's 2015. But essentially, the smart meters are going to be pumping out huge amounts of information about what you do in your home. They're thinking there's so much data about what can happen that it could even be a form of monitor for older people in their homes. You know, is Granny up and about? Well, yeah, if she's turned the kettle on, then probably she's up and about making a cup of tea. And you can deduce exactly when the kettle is turned on. So huge amounts of data being created here. So the government is incredibly aware of this. Governments create huge amounts of data. And these days, they're trying to share it. So a couple of guys, Nigel Shadbolt and Tim Berners-Lee, 2 really important people within the world of the internet, have been helping the government to chuck out as much information as possible so that people can do something with it. So it's both about data, but it's about the previous one, about how open are you. It's about your consumers getting out there. So now citizens can make services with, I don't know, find buses or find the best doctor, find an A&E department that isn't too busy. You know, lots of information being chucked out there. But I suppose one final thing on this is there is a bit of concern about this particular one, which is who owns the data. So there's an initiative in government called My Data. Here's a sort of activist group called Control Shift. And of course, in the news, we have Facebook and Google and people like that. And we're asking, and Twitter, and we're sort of asking who owns the data. So there's a huge amount of interest in all this data that's created and exploiting it and making money out of it. But then there's a question of, well, whose data is it? So the question in this case is, if data is the new oil, are you making any? I mean, do you have data that you're not capturing, that you're not making the most of? Are you refining it, to carry on with the metaphor? So those are that's a rapid fire through 5 big themes for me. Each one, I think, can work across whatever industry you're in, be it healthcare or energy or transportation. They're things, ultimately, that, I said, have been building over the years. And I don't think they're new. I don't think they're going to go away. And what does this mean in combination? Who knows? I mean, I think the world is far too complicated in order to work out what this means. Everyone here has to be agile and imagine for themselves, if this is true, what does it mean for my business? That's one of the key things about being agile and allowing for emergence, is essentially saying, if these things are true, what does it mean for my business? What unique thing do I need to have to do to innovate in my business, to add value to my business, essentially to make a better experience for my customers? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, do we have some questions for Matt, please? Okay, I'm running.
Am I allowed?
Yeah, of course.
Matt, thank you very much. Very interesting. You know all about this because you're in London, and there's lots going on in Silicon Roundabout and all those digital companies, and all this is happening in the world, right? Is it happening in small businesses in the Northwest or the Northeast or in Scotland? Are we aware, and are we skilled up, and can we catch that tide? Is there enough people around to do it?
I very much hope so. I think the simple truth is I've got incomplete knowledge. The people I've been engaging with, sadly, are very much biased towards London. At the same time, a huge number are in Glasgow. And especially when we're talking about social innovation and trying to change, care and trying to change the way in which we think about public services. Actually, there's a great bunch of people who've somewhat been brought to this by Glasgow School of Art, which has a very interesting program in this space. So I think for me, we feel as though this is still, in some of these pockets, is still very early days. The good news is that the barrier to entry is incredibly low. I mean, this is all global knowledge. This is all very inexpensive stuff. So really it's about the drive to do it, and that's sort of why I refer to Glasgow School of Art in some ways. They infected a group of people with the desire and the will to make some change. I hope very much, and maybe there's some people in the audience who can answer the question better than I can, I hope very much that there are people fascinated to make change, because I think the simple truth is you don't have to be in London for this to happen. It really can happen anywhere.
There's another question. Okay, I've got a quick question. Sustainability has been a buzzword in design for some time. However, has the recession and the drive for cost reduction removed it from the design vocabulary? I didn't see it prominently up there.
I thought someone might ask about that. I was sort of very conscious, actually, not to try and pick the themes that have been around. I think that the themes that I was talking about could be applied to sustainability. If we're talking about sustainability, then really human behavior is incredibly important with it. We all know that actually you can choose to purchase a Toyota Prius over a Range Rover, but actually it's also how you put your foot down on the accelerator that speaks to whether that Prius will beat a diesel Golf or whether it, or whether it won't. Similarly, with smart buildings, what often happens is that the building hasn't really been designed for human behavior. So there are many legion examples of where a smart building, so to speak, a sort of very sustainable building, people who leave the windows open or the doors open because it sort of gets too hot and the heating system doesn't work. So really for me, the point is that there are many ways in which we need to engage citizens in sustainable behavior and get people to hack software services to inform ourselves. We need to make use of the smart meter data and actually visualize it in good ways, hence some of those themes. Sustainability is a big issue. Has it been knocked by the recession? Possibly for some people where it involves big investment, but actually an awful lot of people are working out that it's to do with waste. We were discussing it earlier with the NHS, that actually reducing waste is good business sense, is financially effective. And so many people have been looking at the sweet spot of resource efficiency. And essentially that helps us to impact the environment yet, but at the same time saves us money.
Anybody on the floor? Okay. Right, I've got stacks of questions, so thank you for that. One of the things that I've been very conscious of is that we're asking creatives to think in a business-like way. In fact, when you look at all the presentation you've done earlier, the amount of business acumen that one would have to put all that together is quite intense in comparison to where I think the creative industry was maybe 10 years ago. What's being done to promote creativity in the business world in terms of the courses for MBAs and other business universities?
Well, I think firstly, to answer your question about what's being done, many business educators totally recognize they need creativity in their curriculum. And a lot of this sort of is seen as having started in California at Stanford at the D School, which my former colleagues were involved with. But these days we find it everywhere. We find it here, clearly. We find it in Cranfield. We find it in Imperial College, where I lecture as well. I think everyone totally understands that a sense of creativity, practical understanding of design, but also the ability to get beyond the standard business practice and business models and Porter's 5 forces and all that kind of stuff, all that theory is very important. So what's been happening, I think, is that people have recognized that design and creativity represents not just creativity, thinking outside the box, as Wayne was talking about, but it's also practical. So again, coming back to this point that I think Wayne was speaking about very well, that you can have an awful lot of theory, but actually what about the practice? And so an awful lot of MBA programs have been working with live projects and essentially making little startups happen. And that's both about creativity as well as sort of business modeling and planning, but it's also about practical action rather than classroom teaching and learning all of the theories. But at the same time, as well as the education changing, I think in general with some of the stuff you've seen me show around, the Ode, the smell device, or the Amazings, it's actually about collaborations. So some of the stuff we've been doing is essentially about bringing different people together, technologists, business entrepreneurs, and designers. So personally, I don't think I'm ever going to be a great business person. I'm a designer. But if I can work with the right business people, we'll make a fantastic team. So I think that's the real modern reality, is that it's all very, very complicated. It's very hard for someone to be world-class at everything, but it's ever easier to collaborate. So making the connections, which is essentially, what, as you saw with Nailers, is the brokering that really is what matters. How can various people connect together to form a super team rather than feel they've got to be everything just themselves?
Is the Design Council actually doing anything to facilitate that, though, specifically?
Yes, I mean, two things, really. I mean, number one, the national challenges that my team runs are all about bringing people together. So we frame a competition. We just launched one last week around youth unemployment. How can we create better services to engage those young people who are struggling to find work or to boost their skills. And what we're going to be doing there is bringing together often perhaps charities and social enterprises with designers, with brand and communication designers and others. So, and you saw it earlier on with the furniture, where we had a furniture manufacturer and a designer creating new furniture for the NHS. So I think fundamentally with our challenge model, we try to pick problems that no single entity could pick. That's the point. If it's a big enough problem, then you're going to have to get some friends around. So that's what we do. And at the same time, as Jonathan was showing with the Design in Demand program, and there are 2 others associated with technology transfer offices in universities, but also public sector services, it's about connecting designers with those academics or entrepreneurs or business people. So either way, be it that kind of bilateral link where we add design to whatever exists, or somehow bringing together new fusions of, cognitive psychologists, fragrance experts, and industrial designers. Or in the case of Dementia Dog, an assistive dog, that was Alzheimer's Scotland, Glasgow School of Art, and Dogs for the Disabled. Who knew that those guys would want to work together?
Fantastic. The other thing that I'm conscious of is that we're driving all these wonderful products in the UK, and I've got to say that I for one find globalization a fantastic challenge and an incentive to get out there and sell. Is the Design Council doing anything to aid or work with UKTI, for example, on exporting British products?
Yes, I mean, we always work with UKTI in terms of supporting their outreach program. We're talking with them at the moment about healthcare exhibitions that will travel around Brazil and China and others. I'm sure we could always do more, but essentially behind all of this is the theory that if these are great ideas, they will play on the world stage. So even though, for instance, with these challenges, we've always focused on challenges for the NHS or some other British sort of issue, any successful solution ultimately ends up being sold elsewhere. So the ultimate pint glass, for instance, the Australians were incredibly interested in getting that. So, any good product will be world-beating, so start by making a great product.
Okay, well, great. Well, we've got a question up there.
Just a quick question, following on from Charlie's point about housing and design and planning. Is the fact that CABE is now part of your organisation, does that offer great opportunities to perhaps change the perception of CABE and how it has worked in trying to change housing as a whole?
Well, in all honesty, I don't know enough myself about CABE's history and how it was perceived and how it's changing. All I can say is that it is essentially carrying on a portion of the work and is continually working with the industry. There was a huge review, the Bishop Review, that essentially looked out and consulted the industry and tried to say, what's needed now, and with the new national planning policy framework, what does the market need? So I hope and believe very much that the CABE team are doing things that are fundamentally of value. I think in addition, one of the reasons why the trustees of the Design Council were excited by the possibility for CABE to merge with the Design Council, it was to bring many types of design, many more types of design under one roof, as we like to sort of say, from pixel to the city. And so, for instance, we're just starting a program of work around public health, around mental well-being and physical well-being, be that around issues of obesity and diabetes, or excessive alcohol consumption, or depression and stress and anxiety. And we're doing that with a big hospital trust. But it's very important that we can think about things in terms of physical space and environment, just as much as services and products. So if we are dealing with obesity, we need to think about the local planning and the fact that there may only be fast food restaurants in a given environment, just as much as we might think about the ways in which to get people taking more exercise, or in general valuing their health more. So I think we're interested as an organisation both in the particular planning support that CABE, the Design Council CABE can provide, but also we're interested in this sense of the fusion of architecture and the built environment with products and services.
We have time for one more question.
Innovation often causes problems when trying to get finance from traditional forms of banking. Is the Design Council using their influence to influence high street banks for things like the Kickstarter project you mentioned earlier? I mean, the reason being is that innovation often goes, woof, that doesn't work. I'm looking at a new machine. Well, it's not a new machine. It's actually 250 years old, the design. But so far, I'm struggling to actually make that case for finance a practicality. So is the Design Council influencing our high street banks, who are often the first cause for people to go to?
The simple answer is no. It could well be something we look into. But I think the thinking for me would be that that could be quite an uphill struggle and take a long time in order to influence the high street banks. So it's very much something we could do in the mid to long term, perhaps. But in the shorter term, the question is, who is interested to finance stuff, and how can we help seed funding get out there? So again, what we've been doing over the past few years is working either with central government departments or the Technology Strategy Board, which is one of the the biggest investors in early stage technology development, funded fundamentally by the government, but just as much to work with trusts and foundations, people who have often made a lot of money from the private sector who now say, I want to put it to good use. So Nominet Trust we're working with, they're the people who make money from the .uk domain, as well as Guys and St Thomas's charity. So for us, the quicker win is to find people who are interested in early stage ideas. There are many others, such as Nesta and others. They have particular agendas, but our goal is to release that kind of money and get it out into the system as quickly as possible. Admittedly, that has particular focuses. It's not. It doesn't sort of support any idea. It has to be around a particular topic that we think is in the public good that we want to tackle. But I do feel, it's certainly an interesting issue about how we might persuade banks. But to some extent, they have to make their they have to make their investment cases, and if the Chancellor himself cannot make a huge amount of dent in their practice, then I'm a little sceptical of what we can do, but we could talk more about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for, but I'd like to express our thanks to Matt Hunter. Thank you very much. I know you've got a train to catch, so thank you very much indeed, Matt.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks. Well done, Matt. Thank you.